Good evening and welcome to the UNC Art Department's Haynes Visiting Artists Lecture Series. First, I want to extend a huge thanks to Carolina Performing Arts, which was instrumental in bringing Mendi and Keith Obadike to UNC. I also want to thank the MFA in Experimental Documentary Arts program at Duke University, which is also co-sponsor of this talk tonight. So I'm thrilled to be able to welcome and introduce Mendi and Keith tonight. I've known them both for over a decade from their early days in North Carolina. At the time, Mendi was, among other things, a published poet and pursuing her PhD in English at Duke. Keith was also a student at NCCU, producing and playing music while working at the Center for Documentary Studies, where I met them both. During their time in North Carolina, they began to develop a collaborative project in a unique form that they've since continued to explore. It was an internet opera called Sour Thunder, blending science fiction, autobiography with pop music, new music, and a theatrical text in English and Spanish. The project wove together a tale of cultural and racial identity that was at once highly personal and deeply political, and beautiful to listen to. This project was commissioned by Yale University Cabaret, and it took place in 2002 in two separate venues simultaneously with images and sound streamed in from both sites to the web. This project, I think, is indicative of their practice overall, a provocative fusion of text, image, sound, and live movement, confronting questions around race as a kind of technology. Keith and Mendi's work is constantly innovating, emerging from their unique skills and interests in music, literature, and technology. Their vast body of work span and blend those skills and media. The writing and art projects have been included in Art Journal, Black Arts Quarterly, and the anthology Sound Unbound, Sampling Digital Arts and Culture, edited by Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky, and published by MIT Press in 2008. Their work generated much debate in 2001 when they offered Keith's Blackness for sale on eBay. Their project, The Interaction of Colors, was commissioned by the Whitney Museum of Art in 2002. Other commissions include the New York African Film Festival, Electronic Arts Intermix, Whitechapel, London, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, and the New Museum, among many other institutions. They have a lengthy list of exhibition venues, including LA MoCA, the ICP in New York, and Studio Museum in Harlem. They were recipients of a Rockefeller New Media Fellowship and just completed a year as artists in residence at the Tribeca Performing Arts Center. And they recently received a 2011 Rhizome Commission Award for their upcoming project, African Metropole, Sonic City, Lagos. So these are just a few of their most recent accomplishments, and they'll be performing their opera masquerade, Four Electric Ghosts, as part of Carolina Performing Arts Loading Dock series this Thursday. It was a live performance that first premiered at the Kitchen in 2009 and was named as one of the top 10 art shows by VJIR and Artforum for that year. It's an amazing show, so I hope you guys already have tickets because the show is sold out. So without further ado, please help me welcome Mendi and Keith Obadike. I want to start by asking you a little bit about your process, because you've mentioned before, in interviews before, that you describe your process as kind of like DJing, kind of emerging. You know, your work emerges from source text that you then are kind of remixing and sort of remaking into something new. And it especially occurred to me while you were talking that everything that you do are kind of like riffs also, like riffs on language, riffs on stories, and of course the role of music in all of your work. Can you talk a little bit about why that particular form is so resonant? I mean, in terms of the way that you're combining not just text, but doing it in such a way that, again, is sort of making new work, but always kind of referencing or gesturing towards the older form of the media or the story.
I mean, I suspect a lot of people do it. For us, it's just overt, you know, it's up front. And I think a lot of it probably does come from the music, right? Would you say that?
Yeah, I wondered, just when you were asking the question, whether it had to do with the fact that we're two people working together as well. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not, but I think, you know, we're already in our process thinking about how we fit, you know, how our
two things can be in dialogue.
Yeah, so I think that's part of it too.
So just like the process of collaboration itself is kind of like a kind of working together from multiple parts, right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's something about the way that you combine texts in particular that again, are always, are in some ways sort of, you talked about sort of the old media that has always already existed, right? And remaking it in certain ways so that there is a really unique way that the past is present or is imagined differently now. I mean, what the investment that you have in that kind of importance of these historical texts and forms that people not know about, or stories that people might know about. Can you talk a little bit about your interest in that in the importance of that kind of storytelling?
No, I mean, I think
it has more to do with the specific stories than about the process. I mean, I think that's what it's like. There's something that we want to address. Right. It's not different from us, coming up with a new baseline and wanting people to hear that. I mean, whether it's something we want to remember or something we want to make, I don't think there's a technical, a process reason for that.
No, not necessarily a process reason, but the desire. I mean, what struck me is that your work is incredibly devoted to narrative. So I guess that's what I'm asking, is about your interest in narrative.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. What is that? I mean, I'm trying to unpack it right here in front of everybody. I think I started out working in hip hop, and for me, I mean, I can't say this is true for you, but for me, like, everything is an extension of that. So I worked in hip hop, worked in theater, which is the same kind of process for me, sort of underscoring long text, and all the time, like, for me, there's a preoccupation with, storytelling, and so then, later we started sort of writing original stuff, but also collecting other people's stories and sort of rearranging how those elements get told. And I think often we find when you combine sort of two pre-existing stories that people may know really well, other things pop out. Just like in The Pink of Stealth, if you rub 6 Degrees of Separation against Pretty in Pink, sort of something else pops out. Just like, if you hear a mashup, if you hear a musical blend, you hear one part overlaid over another, well, a new instrument pops out in the mix that you didn't hear before, and there's certainly dissonance, but they are.
It can be funky dissonance.
It can be funky dissonance, yeah.
But maybe it's like the power of that reference, right? That resonates in these multiple ways, that people can access it and have a kind of riff themselves on these things.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, and I would say also that for me, I mean, some of I think it's also about when you work in hip hop, that is part of what I'm thinking about, but even beyond the something from this song, something from this song, it's like when we were growing up together, Keith would always critique other people's tracks, and one of the things was that, if people used the sounds that were already in whatever instrument they were using, he's like, well, you didn't even make a new sound, and so he was always putting sounds from different places together to create a new sound to start the track, and even that, I think, has influenced the way we both, at least the way I think about, what we're doing too.
But I think it's also about Mendi being a poet, and that so much of what she does, at least in her process, so much of making the poem is editing, and it's the cutting away of stuff. And so, for us, it's really interesting to sort of start with sort of interviews or with, some pre-existing text, and really just cut away and sculpt something from that.
Great. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the audience. Yes, Ashley.
Hi. I think we mostly work together now. I would say 90% of our work is together. Sometimes we do separate things. We have different ways of talking about the work. I like to talk a lot about the projects in the early stage, in the early stages, and
I don't.
Mendi does not at all.
Yeah.
I could talk forever. I mean, that's just how the stuff gets made for me.
And for me, I mean, it's a little bit different now because we have tried to, just respect each other's preferences, but also realize that in order to make something, we have to do it together. We're either going to talk or not talk, and it's going to be good or bad for one of us. So we've kind of merged our practices. But for me, it came from, like, if I was going to write a poem, if I talked about it, I would say everything I had to say and not need to write the poem, and so I would just not talk until I could write. And so with our projects, that doesn't quite work because Keith really thinks in the talking with other people about the project and not just talking with me, And so that has been a really interesting difference in our process. We've been working together about 15 years at this point, but we grew up together, so we were witnesses to each other's practice for a long, long time before we ever put them together.
And I would say we started out making, many separate things. It's like, I made music for many years, and then started making visual arts, which was mainly, kind of video pieces and performances. And Mendi worked as a poet, and the collaboration was just an effort to sort of merge to merge our life with our art practice more, and to merge the different practices that we had. I mean, sort of Mendi had a life as a writer who sort of wrote in a scholarly realm, but also she had poetry, and so it was a way to merge all of these different practices. So that's kind of how the creative partnership emerged.
You mentioned the notion of alien, that the first project that you mentioned talking about
Yeah.
alien, and then later on you talked about what it meant to be invaded by an innocent. So I was sort of kind of following a colonial idea working through that, and I was just specifically interested in what does it mean to be invaded by an innocent. If you could expound upon some of your thoughts and how you worked through that question.
Do you mean just what do we think it means, or do you mean?
You brought up this question.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I can say that we had that question, like, can you be invaded by someone who's innocent, an innocent being? When we were making Four Electric Ghosts, we were thinking a lot about young soldiers going to war. I was starting to teach, and I had some students who had gone off to the war, and they had no idea what they were getting into. And so, in a very abstract way, that was connected to someone falling into an alien environment, but completely disrupting that place, tearing it apart. And so we were thinking about how often does this happen? Can an invader, can a disruptor really be innocent?
And would they be received as innocent, to the people who were being disrupted?
And so we thought a lot about this question. We don't have any great answers, but we talked to a lot of other people about it, and we interviewed a lot of people about it. And so those answers kind of informed some of the work that we made around it.
Any other questions? Thank you so. Oh, one more.
About those tests or quizzes,
Yeah.
are there any wrong answers?
No.
I think the person who graded will tell us whether they're
we don't have right answers.
No, yeah.
We have right questions.
I think we do have answers that we prefer, but they're not necessarily the same for each of us.
Yeah,
So
we have different takes on the test.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.